Part 1. Two Systems. 1. The characters of the story. In this chapter, Kahneman introduces us to the two main characters of our cognitive processes, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the fast, automatic, and intuitive part of our brain. It's the system that helps us make quick decisions without much thought, like recognizing a friend's face in a crowd or driving a familiar route. On the other hand, System 2 is the slow, deliberate, and analytical part of our brain. It's the system we use when we need to solve a complex math problem or make a difficult decision. Kahneman explains how these two systems interact and influence our thinking and behavior. 2. Attention and effort. This chapter delves into the concept of mental effort and how our brain allocates attention. Kahneman explains that System 2 requires a lot of mental effort and energy, which is why we often rely on System 1 to handle routine tasks. However, when we need to focus and concentrate, System 2 takes over. The chapter also discusses the limitations of our attention and how easily we can become distracted. 3. The lazy controller. Kahneman describes System 2 as a lazy controller because it tends to avoid expending energy whenever possible. This laziness leads us to rely heavily on System 1, even when it might not be the best choice. The chapter explores how this tendency can lead to errors in judgment and decision-making. 4. The Associative Machine. In this chapter, Kahneman explains how System 1 creates associations and patterns based on our experiences. This associative thinking helps us make quick decisions, but it can also lead to biases and errors. The chapter provides examples of how our brain forms these associations and how they influence our behavior. 5. Cognitive ease. Cognitive ease refers to the comfort and ease with which our brain processes information. When we experience cognitive ease, we are more likely to trust our intuitions and make quick decisions. However, when we encounter cognitive strain, we become more cautious and analytical. Kahneman discusses the factors that contribute to cognitive ease and how it affects our decision-making. 6. Norms, surprises, and causes. This chapter explores how System 1 deals with norms, surprises, and causal relationships. Kahneman explains that our brain is constantly looking for patterns and trying to make sense of the world around us. When something unexpected happens, System 1 quickly tries to find a cause or explanation. This tendency can lead to errors in judgment, especially when we jump to conclusions without sufficient evidence. 7. A machine for jumping to conclusions. System 1 is often described as a machine for jumping to conclusions because it makes quick judgments based on limited information. This chapter discusses the dangers of relying too heavily on System 1 and the importance of engaging System 2 when making important decisions. 8. How judgments happen. In this chapter, Kahneman explains the process of forming judgments and the influence of heuristics. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that help us make quick decisions, but they can also lead to biases and errors. The chapter provides examples of common heuristics and how they affect our thinking. 9. Answering an easier question. When faced with a difficult question, System 1 often substitutes it with an easier one. This chapter explores how this substitution process works and how it can lead to errors in judgment. Kahneman provides examples of how we unconsciously replace complex questions with simple ones and the impact this has on our decision-making. Part 2. Heuristics and biases. 1. The law of small numbers. In this chapter, Kahneman explores the common mistake of overgeneralizing from small sample sizes. He explains that our brains are wired to detect patterns, even when there aren't any. This tendency can lead us to draw incorrect conclusions based on insufficient data. For example, if we see a few people from a particular group behaving in a certain way, we might mistakenly believe that all members of that group behave similarly. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing the limitations of small samples and the need for larger, more representative data sets to make accurate judgments. 2. Anchors. Anchoring is a cognitive bias that occurs when we rely too heavily on the first piece of information we receive, the anchor, when making decisions. Kahneman illustrates this with various experiments, showing how even arbitrary numbers can influence our judgments. For instance, if we're asked to estimate the population of a city after being given a random number, our estimate is likely to be influenced by that number. This chapter highlights the pervasive impact of anchoring on our decision-making processes and the importance of being aware of this bias. 3. The science of availability. The availability heuristic is a mental shortcut that relies on immediate examples that come to mind when evaluating a topic or decision. Kahneman explains that events that are more memorable or recent are more likely to influence our judgments. For example, after hearing about a plane crash, we might overestimate the risk of flying, even though statistically, it's much safer than driving. This chapter delves into how the availability heuristic shapes our perceptions of risk and probability, often leading to skewed judgments. 4. Availability, emotion, and risk. Building on the previous chapter, Kahneman explores the interplay between availability, emotions, and perceived risk. He explains that emotionally charged events are more likely to be remembered and thus have a greater impact on our judgments. For instance, vivid news stories about natural disasters can make us overestimate their frequency and severity. This chapter emphasizes the need to recognize the influence of emotions on our perceptions and to seek out objective data when assessing risks. 5. Tom W.'s specialty. In this chapter, Kahneman introduces the Representativeness heuristic, which involves judging the probability of an event based on how similar it is to a prototype or stereotype. He uses the example of Tom W., a fictional character described with certain traits, to illustrate how people often ignore base rates, statistical probabilities, in favor of representativeness. This tendency can lead to errors in judgment, such as assuming that someone with certain characteristics is more likely to belong to a particular group, even when the base rate suggests otherwise. 6. Linda. Less is more. The Linda problem is a famous example used by Kahneman to demonstrate the conjunction fallacy, where people incorrectly believe that specific conditions are more probable than a single general one. In the scenario, Linda is described as a young, politically active woman, and participants are asked to judge whether she is more likely to be a bank teller or a bank teller who is also active in the feminist movement. Despite the logical fallacy, many choose the latter option because it fits the stereotype better. This chapter highlights the pitfalls of relying on representativeness and the importance of understanding probability. 7. Causes trump statistics. Kahneman discusses our preference for causal explanations over statistical ones. He explains that we are more likely to believe a story that provides a clear cause and effect relationship, even if it's not supported by data. This tendency can lead us to overlook important statistical information and make decisions based on anecdotal evidence. The chapter emphasizes the need to balance our natural inclination for causal stories with a critical evaluation of statistical data. 8. Regression to the mean. Regression to the mean is a statistical phenomenon where extreme values tend to be followed by more average ones. Kahneman explains that people often misinterpret this natural tendency, attributing changes to specific causes rather than recognizing it as a statistical regularity. For example, if a student performs exceptionally well on one test and then scores closer to average on the next, we might mistakenly believe that the student slacked off, rather than understanding that extreme performances are likely to be followed by more typical ones. This chapter underscores the importance of recognizing regression to the mean in our judgments. 9. Taming intuitive predictions. In this chapter, Kahneman offers strategies for improving our intuitive predictions. He explains that while our intuitions can be valuable, they are often influenced by biases and heuristics. To make more accurate predictions, Kahneman suggests using statistical models and considering base rates. He also emphasizes the importance of seeking out objective data and being aware of our cognitive biases. This chapter provides practical advice for making better decisions by combining intuition with analytical thinking. Part 3. Overconfidence. 1. The illusion of understanding. In this chapter, Kahneman explores the illusion of understanding, which is the tendency to believe that we understand the world better than we actually do. He explains that our brains are wired to create coherent stories from the information we have, even if that information is incomplete or inaccurate. This tendency can lead us to overestimate our knowledge and abilities. Kahneman uses examples from various fields, such as finance and politics, to illustrate how the illusion of understanding can lead to poor decision-making. He emphasizes the importance of recognizing the limits of our knowledge and being open to new information. 2. The illusion of validity. The illusion of validity is the belief that our judgments and predictions are more accurate than they actually are. Kahneman explains that this illusion is fueled by our confidence in our abilities and the coherence of the stories we create. He uses examples from the world of finance, where experts often make predictions with high confidence, only to be proven wrong. This chapter highlights the dangers of overconfidence and the need to critically evaluate our judgments and predictions. 3. Intuitions versus formulas. In this chapter, Kahneman compares human intuition with statistical formulas. He explains that while our intuitions can be valuable, they are often influenced by biases and heuristics. Statistical formulas, on the other hand, are based on objective data and can provide more accurate predictions. Kahneman uses examples from various fields, such as medicine and finance, to illustrate the superiority of statistical formulas over human intuition. He emphasizes the importance of using data-driven approaches to decision-making and being aware of the limitations of our intuitions. 4. Expert intuition. When can we trust it? Kahneman explores the conditions under which expert intuition can be trusted. He explains that expert intuition is reliable when it is based on extensive experience and feedback in a stable environment. For example, a chess grandmaster's intuition is highly reliable because it is based on years of practice and feedback in a well-defined domain. However, in more complex and unpredictable environments, such as finance or politics, expert intuition is less reliable. This chapter emphasizes the importance of understanding the limitations of expert intuition and using data-driven approaches when possible. 5. The outside view. The outside view, also known as the reference class forecasting, is a method of making predictions based on the outcomes of similar cases rather than relying on our own judgment. Kahneman explains that the outside view can help us overcome the biases and overconfidence that often plague our predictions. He uses examples from various fields, such as project management and finance, to illustrate the benefits of the outside view. This chapter emphasizes the importance of considering external perspectives and using objective data to make more accurate predictions. 6. The engine of capitalism. In this chapter, Kahneman explores the role of optimism and overconfidence in economic behavior. He explains that entrepreneurs and investors often exhibit high levels of optimism and overconfidence, which can drive innovation and economic growth. However, this same optimism can also lead to risky behavior and financial crises. Kahneman uses examples from the world of business and finance to illustrate the double-edged sword of optimism and overconfidence. He emphasizes the importance of balancing optimism with a realistic assessment of risks and uncertainties. Part 4. Choices. 1. Bernoulli's errors. In this chapter, Kahneman critiques traditional economic theories of decision-making, particularly those based on the work of Daniel Bernoulli. Bernoulli's theory of expected utility suggests that people make decisions by weighing the potential outcomes and choosing the one with the highest expected value. However, Kahneman argues that this theory fails to account for the complexities of human behavior. He introduces the concept of prospect theory, which better explains how people actually make decisions under uncertainty. This chapter sets the stage for a deeper exploration of the psychological factors that influence our choices. 2. Prospect theory. Prospect theory is one of Kahneman's most significant contributions to the field of behavioral economics. In this chapter, he explains how people evaluate potential gains and losses differently, leading to irrational decision-making. According to prospect theory, people are more sensitive to losses than to gains, a phenomenon known as loss aversion. This means that the pain of losing $100 is greater than the pleasure of gaining $100. Kahneman uses various experiments and real-world examples to illustrate how prospect theory can explain seemingly irrational behavior, such as why people buy insurance or gamble. 3. The endowment effect. The endowment effect is a cognitive bias that causes people to value something more highly simply because they own it. In this chapter, Kahneman explores how ownership affects our perception of value and influences our decisions. He uses experiments to demonstrate how people are reluctant to part with their possessions, even when offered a fair price. This bias can lead to suboptimal decisions, such as holding on to investments for too long or refusing to sell a house at market value. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing the endowment effect and making more rational choices. 4. Bad events. In this chapter, Kahneman examines the impact of negative events on decision-making. He explains that people tend to overestimate the likelihood and severity of bad events, leading to excessive caution and risk aversion. This tendency is known as the Availability Heuristic, where vivid and memorable events are more likely to influence our judgments. Kahneman uses examples from various domains, such as health and finance, to illustrate how the fear of bad events can lead to irrational behavior. He emphasizes the need to balance our natural aversion to risk with a realistic assessment of probabilities. 5. The fourfold pattern. The fourfold pattern is a framework that describes how people evaluate risk in different scenarios. According to this pattern, people are risk-averse when it comes to potential gains, but risk-seeking when it comes to potential losses. This means that we are more likely to take risks to avoid losses than to achieve gains. Kahneman uses examples from gambling and investment to illustrate how the fourfold pattern influences our decisions. He emphasizes the importance of understanding this pattern and making more rational choices based on objective probabilities. 6. Rare events. In this chapter, Kahneman explores how people perceive and weigh rare events. He explains that we tend to overestimate the likelihood of rare events, such as winning the lottery or being involved in a plane crash. This bias is driven by the availability heuristic, where vivid and memorable events are more likely to influence our judgments. Kahneman uses examples from various domains, such as insurance and gambling, to illustrate how the overestimation of rare events can lead to irrational behavior. He emphasizes the need to recognize this bias and make more rational decisions based on objective probabilities. 7. Risk policies. Risk policies are strategies for managing risk and making better decisions under uncertainty. In this chapter, Kahneman discusses various approaches to risk management, such as diversification and insurance. He explains that people often make inconsistent decisions when faced with risk, leading to suboptimal outcomes. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of developing clear and consistent risk policies to guide our decisions. He uses examples from finance and business to illustrate how effective risk management can lead to better outcomes. 8. Keeping score. In this chapter, Kahneman explores the concept of mental accounting, where people categorize and evaluate their financial decisions in separate mental accounts. This tendency can lead to irrational behavior, such as treating money differently depending on its source or intended use. Kahneman uses examples from personal finance and investment to illustrate how mental accounting influences our decisions. He emphasizes the importance of recognizing this bias and making more rational choices based on overall financial goals. 9. Reversals. Reversals occur when people change their preferences based on how choices are framed. In this chapter, Kahneman explains how the framing effect influences our decisions and leads to inconsistent behavior. He uses experiments to demonstrate how different presentations of the same information can lead to different choices. For example, people are more likely to choose a medical treatment with a 90% survival rate than one with a 10% mortality rate, even though the two are equivalent. Kahneman emphasizes the importance of recognizing the framing effect and making more rational decisions based on objective information. 10. Frames and reality. In final chapter of Part 4, Kahneman explores the broader implications of framing on our perception and behavior. He explains how the way we frame our experiences and choices can shape our reality and influence our decisions. Kahneman uses examples from various domains, such as politics and marketing, to illustrate how framing can be used to manipulate our perceptions. He emphasizes the importance of being aware of framing effects and making more rational choices based on objective information. Part 5. Two Selves. 1. Two Selves. In this chapter, Kahneman introduces the concept of the experiencing self and the remembering self. The experiencing self is the part of us that lives in the present moment, experiencing life as it happens. The remembering self, on the other hand, is the part of us that looks back on our experiences and creates a narrative. Kahneman explains that these two selves often have different perspectives and priorities. For example, the experiencing self might enjoy a relaxing vacation, while the remembering self might prefer a vacation filled with exciting activities that make for a great story. This chapter explores the tension between these two selves and how it influences our decisions and happiness. 2. Life as a story. Kahneman delves deeper into the idea that we construct narratives of our lives. He explains that the remembering self is like a storyteller, creating a coherent and meaningful story from our experiences. This narrative shapes our identity and influences our decisions. Kahneman uses examples from various fields, such as psychology and literature, to illustrate how we create and interpret our life stories. He emphasizes the importance of understanding the role of the remembering self in shaping our perceptions and choices. 3. Experienced well-being. In this chapter, Kahneman explores the concept of experienced well-being, which refers to the quality of our moment-to-moment experiences. He explains that experienced well-being is influenced by various factors, such as our environment, activities, and social interactions. Kahneman uses research findings to illustrate how different aspects of our lives contribute to our overall well-being. He emphasizes the importance of focusing on the present moment and making choices that enhance our experienced well-being. 4. Thinking about life. Kahneman concludes the book by reflecting on the relationship between the experiencing self and the remembering self. He explains that while the experiencing self lives in the present, the the remembering self shapes our long-term happiness and satisfaction. Kahneman uses examples from various domains, such as health and finance, to illustrate how our decisions are influenced by the interplay between these two selves. He emphasizes the importance of balancing the needs and perspectives of both selves to achieve a fulfilling and meaningful life.